Just when you thought it was safe to put your mobile device down for like a minute, up pops a notification about 30 seconds into it, and it's a notification that says ESPN is trying to trade. That's right, ESPN, the network, is trying to trade for Al Michaels, who's currently under contract at NBC and basically just doing Sunday Night Football these days. ESPN is doing everything that it can possibly do to try to revive the dying Monday Night Football. And what better way to do it, ESPN, than with a 75-year-old broadcaster who is widely regarded as the best play-by-play broadcaster almost in the history of the National Football League. But this whole idea that ESPN's actually going to have to trade for another announcer has led me to have to do a podcast on this. Welcome to the Mighty Rip Pod. I am Dave DeBaugh, and I want to talk sports with you, and in this case, I want to talk broadcasting with you. All of that, and trust me, a whole lot more, coming up on the Mighty Rip Pod today. But we begin with back-to-back days of ridiculousness. Now, last week, Tony Romo got himself a contract worth $180 million over 10 years. Look, Tony Romo is going to be making more money than most of the players on the field that he's actually making calls about or predictions about or using his magic 8-ball to sway us all into believing that Tony Romo is the greatest prognosticator of all time, and he might just very well be that. That was what CBS was thinking, and that's why they didn't want to lose Tony Romo to ESPN. So they essentially matched a deal that ESPN was trying to put together to lure Tony Romo to ESPN. So earlier today, ESPN, who is desperately trying to figure out, and let's be really clear what this is all about. This is really a little bit less about Al Michaels and more about ESPN and Disney and ABC wanting to get another shot at having a Super Bowl on one of their networks. That's really what this is all about. ESPN's deal actually comes up a year before the other contracts with Fox, CBS, and NBC. So ESPN wanted to sort of get out ahead of this ahead of time, and they came up with this like completely out of the box idea that you're actually going to trade one announcer for another announcer and have them swap networks. It's just absolutely unbelievable. The second part of this story is that ESPN is basically saying to NBC and to the National Football League that if we were able to pull off Al Michaels and get him to Monday Night Football, if we're able to do that, we're then going to turn around and sign, gosh darn it, the guy that's going to say gosh at least 15 times on every broadcast, Peyton Manning. That would be what ESPN would try to do. And they're going to pay Peyton Manning an insane amount of money. Right about now, John Gruden is sitting there in Las Vegas. He's at a craps table. He's sitting there and he's thinking, damn it, I should have just stayed in broadcasting. Would have been a hell of a lot easier than having to deal with Derek Carr and all of these other rumors about potentially getting the greatest quarterback of all time, who no longer has the greatest quarterback of all time arm, but would be good for putting people in the seats in our beautiful new Death Star arena stadium that looks like it was built by Darth Vader and the rest of the Imperial forces. Really, I mean, if you take a look at that, that has Darth Vader written all over it. I'm just saying. So for Peyton Manning, we don't even know if Peyton Manning's going to be a good broadcaster. We certainly know that he's good at doing television commercials, and he is pretty funny. And I think he'll be fine. I don't know if he'll be as good as Tony Romo, but I think he'll be fine. He'll certainly be a lot better than Booger McFarland. I can tell you that right now. Look, when ESPN made the decision last year to put Booger McFarland into the penthouse, into the suite of Monday Night Football, I remember talking to a friend, and I said, what the hell is ESPN thinking? Why would they do that? It was clear as water is wet that Booger McFarland was best as a third person in a booth and had no business only being in a two-person booth. That's just way too much pressure for Booger to handle. Look, Booger's a good guy, so I don't want to rip on him too much. But as a broadcaster, he has no business being in one of the flagship properties of the National Football League. And I'll tell you why it's one of the flagship properties. ESPN reportedly pays $1 billion to show Monday Night Football and a couple playoff games. They're not even in the Super Bowl rotation versus the NBC contract, which is reportedly, I think, $950 million, $50 million less, and they get Super Bowl broadcast rights every 3 or 4 years. So ESPN is flexing its muscle and is trying to figure out how it can get a bigger piece of the pie from the National Football League well ahead of time. This is a negotiation tactic by the folks over at the Mothership. Okay, so now the big question that you've all been waiting for. Who should ESPN trade to NBC in exchange for Al Michaels? Now, look, I don't know that there's actually going to be an actual trade. I mean, we've heard everything from all of the Disney, several of the Disney characters. Donald Duck hasn't had a hit in at least 75 years. So why not ship him off to NBC? Look, I've seen everything that you could possibly think of today. The one thing I haven't seen yet, which is actually legitimate, and it's not just funny, but it's actually legitimate. Look, NBC has its own sports network, which is fledgling, is the best way to describe their sports network. Sure, you can watch some hockey on it. Sure, they have some other interesting programming occasionally on that network, but they have no real sports daily presence on it. So why not trade for SVP? If you're NBC and this is really a player for player trade and it's not a player to be named later type deal like they do in Major League Baseball, then I think they should actually just ask for SVP and some money in exchange for allowing Al Michaels to jump ship and head over to ESPN. As for, and by the way, I'm not even sure ESPN needs Al Michaels. I mean, Joe Tessitore is fantastic. He's fantastic at boxing. He's fantastic at football. It was always Booger McFarland and Jason Witten that were the problem. It wasn't Joe Tessitore. Anytime Joe said anything remotely funny, or anytime Joe actually literally just threw up a softball for Booger or Jason to hit, they both whiffed on it badly. I'm sure Peyton Manning and Joe Tessitore would be a fantastic combination. So I don't even think ESPN needs Al Michaels. But if they do get Al Michaels, they stick him with Peyton Manning. I think it would work out really well for ESPN. As for NBC, what would they do on Sunday Night Football? Look, they've got Mike Tirico just sitting there waiting, just licking his chops to be the main guy on Sunday Night Football, and Mike Tirico would be absolutely fantastic. Look, he's not Al Michaels, but he's not far off. He is younger than Al Michaels. He's definitely a little more hip than Al Michaels, and I would have loved it. I would have loved to be on the golf course with Al Michaels earlier today, because he was out there playing golf at Riviera in Los Angeles, and he was doing two things. He was playing golf and he was watching the stock market continue to crash as it did badly today. That's what Al Michaels, I predict, was doing. And then because Al Michaels probably doesn't get notifications on his phone like you and I get, He probably didn't even know that another network was trying to trade for him at the time it actually went down. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in to the big Mighty Rip pod. Hey, do check out our website at mighty.rip. Fresh sports content on a daily basis. I still, by the way, cannot believe that CBS actually gave $180 million to Tony Romo for 10 years. Like, I read this earlier today that Jim Nantz's contract is really only like $3.5 million. Hello, friends. I'm sorry, but Jim Nantz is vastly underpaid if Tony Romo is going to get that kind of money. I'm just saying. I mean, Tony Romo is great, but let's face it, Jim Nantz makes him look even better than he already was. For the Mighty Rip Pod, I'm Dave DeBaugh, reminding you that sometimes players, coaches, and front office folks, and in this case, networks, make horrifically bad decisions, and it's our jobs as fans to set them